Last Tuesday, I found myself sitting in the back of a sterile, fluorescent-lit government hall in Seoul. On stage, a young couple was being handed a golden key, the symbolic deed to a subsidized apartment in a new, fertility-smart city. The official was beaming, his voice booming through the speakers about the latest data. South Korea's total fertility rate had finally ticked up to 0.85. He called it a triumph of policy, a rebirth of the nation, and a victory for the future. I watched the husband, a man in his early 30s named Min-jun. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at a thick stack of loan documents with the kind of intense, hollow focus you usually see in people calculating a massive gambling debt. When I caught up with him later by the elevators, I congratulated him on the new home. He didn't look at me. He just tapped the folder and said, "It's not a home. It's a 30-year collateral. The baby is just the down payment." He explained that he and his wife hadn't originally planned on a child. They could barely navigate the 10-square-meter efficiency of their current lives. But the government, the administrative leviathan, had offered a deal they couldn't refuse. A low-interest mortgage and a prioritized apartment in exchange for a new national asset. He spoke about his future daughter not as a person, but as a resource allocation that allowed them to finally escape their parents' basement. The headlines you're seeing today about the 0.85 rebound paint a picture of a civilization waking up. They suggest that the evolutionary strike is over. But looking at Min-jun's face, I didn't see a happy father. I saw a man who had been drafted into a demographic war he didn't want to fight. This 0.85 isn't a sign of hope. It's the sound of a state-run machine finally finding the right price for a human life. And it raises a chilling question. When a government starts buying babies with concrete and tax breaks, are we witnessing a recovery or just the most expensive tactical maneuver in human history?
I mean, the golden key, Min-jun's face, the phrase 30-year collateral, it's one of the most chilling things I've heard. It's the perfect snapshot.
It felt like I was watching two completely different events happen at the same time.
You were watching a collision. On the one hand, you've got this thing you called the administrative leviathan.
Yeah, that term just felt right. This huge, impersonal state machine.
It's fitting. It's a perfect description for what's happening in East Asia. You have this massive government apparatus that has switched into emergency mode. It's trying to engineer its way out of what it sees as national extinction.
And on the other side of that collision,
you have a person. You have Min-jun. You have an individual just trying to hold on to some kind of autonomy as some kind of personal life in a system that's starting to view him less as a citizen.
And more as what? A resource.
A biological resource, an asset on a national balance sheet.
That's exactly the vibe I got. It wasn't a celebration of a family, it was an acquisition. But let's talk about the numbers for a second. The official was so proud of 0.85, a triumph, but that's still shockingly low, isn't it?
It is catastrophically low. What the official was celebrating is what economists would call a dead cat bounce. Even a dead cat will bounce if you drop it from high enough.
Right, so what's the baseline? What's the number we're supposed to be aiming for?
The magic number is 2.1. That's the replacement level. 2.1 children per woman on average, just to keep the population from shrinking.
Okay, so 2.1 is just to stay flat.
Just to break even. Now, South Korea in 2023 hit a world record low, 0.72.
0.72.
Yes. So when you see it tick up to 0.85, you can see why an official wants to call it a victory. But in reality, you're still deep in the danger zone. This isn't a gentle decline anymore. We are talking about a demographic collapse. It's a spiral.
Just to put that in perspective, 0.72 means that for every, say, 100 people in one generation, the next generation is, what, around 35 people?
Yes. And if you play that forward 2 or 3 generations, you start to understand why the government is panicking. You're looking at the actual math of extinction.
So that's the death cross I've heard about.
The point where deaths just consistently outnumber births. And that's why they're acting like a leviathan. They have to. They're throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at this. They're literally building new cities from scratch, all because they are staring into a demographic abyss.
We want to do a real deep dive into why, and not just the surface level stuff. We're looking at this through the eyes of the people living it, through 3 sort of core stories. First, there's Min-jun's story, the money trap.
The financial side of it all.
Then there's the gender war, which is a whole other layer of intensity, a reproductive strike.
A cultural battle that money can't seem to solve.
And finally, the part that makes this so urgent and frankly scary, the geopolitical angle. the security nightmare with North Korea looming over everything.
Right. It explains the difference in approach, the violent, desperate struggle for survival in Korea versus maybe a more quiet, elegant resignation you might see somewhere like Japan.
Let's go right back to Min-jun and that golden key. I want to understand this housing for babies policy. It seems like the administrative Leviathan designed it, but it's failing because it completely ignores this educational arms race.
This is the first and maybe the biggest disconnect. The government, the Leviathan, it operates on logic. It looks at spreadsheets.
Okay.
And the spreadsheets say young people are not having babies. The spreadsheets also say young people cannot afford homes in Seoul. So the bureaucratic conclusion is simple.
If we give them homes, they'll have babies.
Input housing, output baby. It's a perfectly logical, rational policy from 1,000 feet up.
And on the ground, it makes sense too, right? I mean, everyone knows housing in Seoul is insanely expensive. So a subsidized apartment seems like a godsend.
It solves the shelter problem, but it does absolutely nothing to solve the survival problem.
What's the difference? Shelter, survival. Aren't they the same thing?
Not in modern Seoul, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
Survival isn't just about having a roof over your head. It's about social survival. It's about your child's status, their future, their entire life trajectory.
This is more than just keeping up with the Joneses.
Or this is a deep-seated fear of your child slipping down the class ladder. And the data on this is crystal clear. The analysis shows that, yes, housing cost is the #1 factor for a couple deciding whether to have their first child.
Right.
It accounts for about 30% of the decision-making. So the government isn't wrong about that, but the entire calculus it flips on its head the moment that first baby is born.
How does it flip?
For the second child, or even thinking about a third, the #1 fear is no longer housing. It's not even on the radar. It's education, specifically the crushing cost of private education.
Okay, the hagwons, the cram schools.
The hagwons. And, even calling them cram schools doesn't do it justice. That sounds like something you do for a week before your final exams.
Right, a little extra tutoring.
This is not a little extra tutoring. This is a parallel private education system. It's an industrial-scale operation that takes over a child's life from the moment the regular school bell rings until 10, 11, sometimes midnight.
I saw a figure, I had to read it twice. $19 billion.
Yeah.
Here.
Right. South Koreans spend $19 billion annually on this shadow education. For a country with a population of about 51 million people, that number is it's staggering.
Is that just the super wealthy, the families in, Gangnam?
And that's the most brutal part of it? No, it's everyone. The participation rate for school-age children in hagwons is nearly 80%.
80%. So if you're Min-jun and you decide not to send your daughter?
Then your daughter is the odd one out. She's the one left behind. She's sitting in an empty classroom at 4 p.m. while every single one of her friends is boarding a yellow bus to go to the math academy, the English academy, the music academy.
So it's not really a choice. Opting out means you're basically accepting a lower status future for your child.
You're signaling that you've given up. In what they call a credential society, or gakureki shakai, your entire life is determined by which university you get into. And not just any university.
It has to be a SKY university.
Exactly. Seoul National, Korea, or Yonsei. If you don't get into one of those three, the doors to the top corporations, to the government, to the upper middle class, they're effectively closed to you. And the only accepted path to SKY runs directly through the hagwon system.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in Min-jun's shoes. He's standing there with the loan documents for his new subsidized apartment. What's the new math he's doing in his head?
He's calculating the second set of books. For a top-tier family, the cost of this shadow education can be nearly 20% of their monthly income.
20%. On top of the mortgage.
On top of everything else. But here's the statistic that truly reveals how cruel this system is. Low-income families, they're found to be spending roughly the same absolute amount on tutoring as they do on food.
Wait, again, they spend as much money on after-school lessons as on groceries.
Yes. It is a literal direct trade-off between calories and calculus, between nutrition and fractions. So when Min-jun looks at his unborn child and calls her the down payment, he's not being cynical. He's being a rational economic actor.
The government covered the initial investment.
They covered the entry fee.
Yeah.
But he's staring down the barrel of the monthly installments. And those installments are for education, and they are terrifying.
And it's not just the money, is it? It's the whole lifestyle. I was reading about this 10 p.m. curfew in Seoul.
Right. The government isn't totally blind to this. They saw that children were literally studying themselves into exhaustion, into depression, so they passed a law. All hagwons must close by 10 p.m. Yes, they even have patrols. Government officials who walk the streets in neighborhoods like Dichi, the epicenter of all this, looking for schools with the lights on past 10.
That seems like a good step, trying to protect the kids.
It was well-intentioned, but the system is like water. It just finds the cracks. The market adapts. The patrols come by, some schools just turn off the lights, and they keep teaching in the dark. Or, and this is even more dystopian, they use study buses.
Study buses? What on earth is a study bus?
You take a group of students, you put them on a bus with blacked out windows, and the bus just drives around the city in circles for hours. The tutor is on the bus teaching.
Why?
Because the police can't raid a moving vehicle as easily as they can raid a stationary building.
That paints an unbelievable picture. A bus full of 14-year-olds driving aimlessly through Seoul at 11 p.m., doing physics problems in the dark. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel.
It highlights the sheer desperation. The parents aren't villains. They're terrified. They feel that if they let up for even a second, their child will become a supoja.
Supoja, what does that mean?
It's slang. It translates literally to a person who has given up on math.
Okay.
But culturally, it means so much more. It's a brand. It means you're a failure. You couldn't keep up. You've been washed out of the system. And no parent wants that label for their child.
I also read about something called screaming pods. Please tell me that's not literal.
Oh, it is 100% literal. In that same neighborhood, Daichi, the pressure is so immense that a new kind of business has emerged. They offer small, soundproof rooms. Think of a coin-operated karaoke booth.
Okay.
But there's no music. You pay your money, you go inside the box, and you just scream for a few minutes to let it all out.
People are paying money to rent a space to scream.
Because they can't do it at home, they can't do it at school, the pressure has to go somewhere, so they rent a pod and scream into the void.
This all brings us back to the housing policy, the golden P. The government gives Minjun this subsidized apartment in a shiny new fertility smart city. But where are these cities actually being built?
On the outskirts of Seoul, mostly, where the land is cheaper.
But the best hagwons, the ones that are famous for getting kids into SKY universities, they're all in the city center, in Gangnam and Daichi.
The Bank of Korea, the central bank, did a formal study on this. They found that the single biggest driver of real estate prices in elite neighborhoods is proximity to elite hagwons.
So the government solution is actually a trap.
It's a gilded cage.
You get the affordable apartment, but you're now geographically cut off from the very educational ecosystem you need for your child to succeed in this society. You've secured a roof, but in doing so, you've potentially sacrificed your child's future status.
That is the cruel irony of Minjun's 30-year collateral. He understands that by accepting the state's help with one problem, housing, he's been plunged into an even bigger and more expensive problem, education. The administrative Leviathan sees a column on a spreadsheet labeled housing shortage. Minjun sees a life sentence labeled education hell. The policy and the reality are on two different planets.
It's just devastating when you frame it like that. The state thinks of the child as a national asset, a future taxpayer, a future soldier. But for the parent, the child has become a high-risk investment project.
And if that project fails, the entire family's social and economic future goes down with it. That's why the subsidies, the apartments, they're not moving the needle back to 2.1. They're treating a symptom, a very visible symptom, while the disease of hypercompetition just rages on underneath.
And the money, the competition, that's only half the story. It's not the only reason Minjun looked like a man drafted into a war. Because there's another war going on, a much more personal one. It's about who actually does the work.
The cultural battle.
Right, which brings us to the second part of this. We have to look at this reproductive strike. This is about the long-term sustainability of the state trying to just override individual choice. It's about the limits of what a government can do when it runs up against a collapsing social contract.
This is where the spreadsheets and the economic incentives just completely fall apart. You can't put a price on this stuff. This is arguably the most intractable part of the whole crisis.
To get into this, I want to bring in another voice, another perspective from the research, a woman named Ji-won. She's a professional in her 30s in Seoul, and she described her life as navigating the gender trenches.
The gender trenches? This phrase. What's her view on the government's cash handouts and apartments?
She called it a logical error, a complete misdiagnosis of the problem. She said she sees her friends and colleagues take the money, have a child, and then watches their careers, their health, their entire lives just crumble under the pressure.
So for her, this isn't about affordability.
For her, the old Confucian social contract is dead. It's broken. So refusing to have children isn't an emotional decision or a financial one. She sees it as a completely rational, political act of self-preservation.
That thinking is at the very heart of the 4B movement. Have you come across this?
I've seen the term. It's the 4 no's, isn't it?
Right. The B comes from the Korean word bi, which means no. So it's bioni, no dating, bisexu, no sex, bion, no marriage, and finally, bisulsen, no children.
That's not just opting out. That's a complete withdrawal from the entire system of relationships. It's not, I'm busy with my career. It's, I am on strike from the entire patriarchal structure.
It is a strike, a reproductive strike. And to get why it's so radical, you have to understand what they're striking against. It's what some call the Confucian hangover.
The traditional philosophy.
Yes, but specifically as it applies to gender roles. The traditional contract is rigidly patriarchal. The woman's role is to support the husband, manage the home, and above all, produce an heir to continue the family line.
But that's the old Korea. Modern South Korea is a high-tech, globalized economic powerhouse. Women are just as educated as men. They have demanding careers.
Exactly. The economy has modernized, but the home has not. So a woman can be a top executive from 9 to 5, but when she walks through her front door, the ghost of the Joseon dynasty is waiting for her in the kitchen. The double burden doesn't even begin to cover it. The data is shocking. Even in households where both partners have full-time professional jobs, women in South Korea still do about 85% of the housework and childcare.
85%. So what is the husband doing?
He's probably not even home. The corporate culture of long hours is one thing, but there's also the mandatory after-work drinking sessions with the boss and colleagues. That's how you get promotions. It leads to this phenomenon called widower-style parenting.
Widower-style parenting.
The father is essentially a ghost in his own family. He's a financial provider who shows up late at night and on weekends. The mother, meanwhile, works her 50-hour week, then comes home to her second full-time, unpaid job, managing the household, cooking, cleaning, and, critically, acting as the full-time manager of that insane educational arms race we just talked about.
So when the government comes to Jiwon and offers her $1,000 to have a baby, she's not thinking free money.
She's hearing, here's a small signing bonus for you to enlist in a lifetime of indentured servitude that will destroy your career, your health, and your sanity. And she's saying, no, thank you. It's a bad deal.
It's a fundamentally bad deal.
And this is where we get into a concept from philosophy that really explains the state's actions. It's called biopolitics.
Yeah.
It's from a thinker named Michel Foucault. And the idea is simple. Traditionally, governments manage things. They manage territory, the economy, roads, taxes. Biopolitics is when the state's focus shifts to managing life itself.
Managing people?
Managing the population as a biological entity, not as a collection of individual citizens with rights, but as a herd, a resource.
Like a farmer managing livestock.
It sounds crude, but yes. The administrative Leviathan looks at the demographic charts and thinks like a farmer. Our breeding stock is down. Production has fallen. We need to implement measures to increase the yield.
And women's bodies are the means of production.
Women's bodies are the factory floor for the nation's most critical resource, future workers and future soldiers.
Hear you say that makes the whole Golden Key ceremony feel 10 times more sinister. It's not a gift to a family. It's a factory foreman giving a bonus to a machine for meeting its production quota.
And that is precisely how the women in the 4B movement see it. Their strike is an act of reclaiming their own biological sovereignty. They're saying, my body is not a national resource. It is not a tool of the state.
I read a quote from one woman that was just stopped me in my tracks. She said that cutting off the lineage is the last and most powerful act of rational defiance.
Because in a Confucian system, the lineage is sacred. It's everything. So to say, if the survival of this patriarchal line requires my subjugation and the line ends with me, I mean, that is the most profound rebellion possible.
But a rebellion like that has to have a backlash.
A massive backlash. The gender war in South Korea is not a media invention. It is a real, deep, and bitter political chasm.
This is where the Idanom come in.
The Idnam. It means men in their 20s. And this is a generation of young men who feel completely besieged. They look at the world and they don't see their own privilege. They see a society that demands they sacrifice 2 years of their life for mandatory military service, something women don't have to do.
and a brutal job market waiting for them when they get out.
Exactly. So when they hear feminist arguments, they don't hear a call for equality. They hear it as an attack. They feel like they're being blamed for a patriarchal system their grandfathers built, a system they don't feel they benefit from.
So you have young women on a reproductive strike against the patriarchy, young men mobilizing politically against feminism. They're moving hard to the right.
And the government is fanning the flames. The current presidential administration won, in part, by appealing to this anti-feminist sentiment. They've talked about abolishing the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. The president himself has publicly blamed feminism for the low birth rate,
Which is just pouring gasoline on a raging fire.
It creates a complete political and social deadlock. The state is trying to solve a profound cultural crisis, a breakdown of trust and intimacy between men and women, with the only tools it knows: economic incentives and political rhetoric. It's trying to bribe people into having families while simultaneously telling them the other gender is the enemy. It is the structural limit of the Leviathan. Bureaucracy is powerful, but you cannot write a regulation that creates love. You cannot offer a subsidy that manufactures trust. You cannot force intimacy at gunpoint.
It's a Cold War being fought in bedrooms and kitchens across the country. And while this internal conflict is tearing society apart, there's this huge external threat that makes it all so much more dangerous.
The ticking clock.
The ticking clock. Because unlike Italy or Spain, who also have low birth rates, South Korea shares a border with a nuclear-armed enemy.
And that changes everything. It turns a demographic problem into an existential security crisis. It explains the sheer panic in Seoul and why their response is so much more aggressive than what we see from their neighbors.
Okay, so this is our third story, the geopolitical fortress. We have to compare South Korea's desperate, security-driven, almost violent approach to this with Japan's very different strategy of what's been called an elegant demographic retreat.
Put yourself in the shoes of a 4-star general at the Ministry of Defense in Seoul. You look at the fertility rate, that 0.72 number. You're not worried about the future of the pension system.
You're worried about the front line.
You're seeing a hole being blown in the northern wall of your fortress. It's a national defense failure in the making.
Because of the military draft, conscription.
Exactly. The entire defense posture against North Korea is built on a large active-duty army of conscripts. To maintain that army, to man the DMZ, they need a steady supply of young men. The magic number is about 200,000 new recruits every single year.
And with the birth rate in free fall, the math doesn't add up.
The pipeline is running dry. Back in 2006, they had about 674,000 active troops. The latest projections, as the .72 generation starts to reach military age, show that number falling below 400,000. It's a catastrophic drop.
We talked about the death cross for the population. This sounds like a defense cross for the military.
The cohort of future soldiers is shrinking with every passing day. And this explains the government's desperation. The administrative Leviathan isn't just trying to save the economy, it's trying to preserve the physical existence of the state itself.
And this is where the comparison with Japan is so stark. Japan is also aging. It's also shrinking.
Their birth rate is also very low, around 1.3, not as low as Korea's, but still far below replacement. But the entire atmosphere in Tokyo around this issue is different.
What's the feeling there?
The words I've seen used to describe it are things like managed civilizational shrinkage, or my favorite, gentle despair.
Gentle despair. It sounds like the title of a novel. It's so passive.
It's an elegant retreat. Japan is an island. They have no land borders with hostile enemies. They have a pacifist constitution. They don't have the existential day-to-day threat that South Korea lives with. So Japan has, it seems, looked at the numbers and accepted the inevitable.
They're not trying to force the birth rate back to 2.1 with these huge aggressive policies.
Not with the same kind of violence, no. Their focus is different. They're pivoting to automation, to robotics, to AI. They are actively trying to design a functional, prosperous society that can be run by fewer people. They're managing the sunset.
But South Korea can't afford a sunset.
They believe they can't. Because just a few dozen miles north of Seoul, there's the North Korean army. The armistice from 1953 is just that. It's not a peace treaty. They are still technically at war.
So they can't have gentle despair. They need bodies. They need boots on the ground.
And this is where the biopolitics becomes almost overtly violent. The state looks at a woman like Ji-won and doesn't just see a potential mother. It sees a producer of soldiers. It sees a walking, talking piece of critical defense infrastructure.
There's such a dark irony here because it wasn't always this way. I was reading about the 1960s and 70s under the military dictatorship of Park Chung-hee. The government's policy was the exact opposite.
It's the ultimate whiplash. Back then, the fertility rate was incredibly high, 6 children per woman. And the government saw that as the national crisis. The view was, we are too poor, we have too many mouths to feed, population growth is holding back our economic development.
So they launched a massive family planning campaign.
Aggressive doesn't even begin to describe it. The slogan was, stop at 2 and raise them well. They pushed contraceptives, vasectomies. There are documented cases of coerced sterilizations. It was biopolitics in reverse. The state was screaming, for the good of the nation, you must stop having children.
And now, 60 years later, the very same state apparatus is screaming, for the good of the nation, you must start having children.
It lays bare the state's underlying philosophy. The individual human being is just a variable in a national equation. In the 1960s, you were a liability, a mouth to feed. Today, you're an asset, a rifle to be held. The person, Minjun or Ji-won, they haven't changed. But their value on the administrative Leviathan's national ledger has completely flipped.
And people feel that. They feel that utilitarian logic. Minjun knows the golden key isn't a gift. It's a recruitment bonus for a demographic army.
And when you feel like you're being treated like a piece of equipment, your natural response is to resist. If you treat people like a herd to be managed, eventually the herd is going to rebel. And that rebellion is the reproductive strike.
So if this fails, if the bribes don't work and the babies don't come, what's plan B for the fortress? What happens when there are no more soldiers?
Plan B is what some are calling technological solace. The South Korean military is now in a frantic race to develop and deploy AI, unmanned weapon systems, drone swarms, automated sentry guns along the DMZ. They are trying to replace the missing human soldiers with silicon and steel.
So the fertility smart city, built to house families, could end up being defended by robots.
That's the darkest irony of all. The government builds the apartments for the children who are never born. So instead, they fill the country with AI soldiers to protect the empty apartments. It's the ultimate choice. Japan's automated sunset versus South Korea's financialized rebirth. And Korea is fighting tooth and nail for that rebirth, but the tools they're using, money, coercion, pressure, might just be speeding up the collapse.
You have the economic trap of housing and education making children an impossible financial burden.
Then you have the cultural trap of the gender war, making marriage and partnership a battleground.
And then you have the geopolitical trap of North Korea, which makes the government so panicked and heavy-handed that it alienates its own citizens.
When you pull it all together, what you see is a really tragic trajectory. The state is trying to solve what is fundamentally a spiritual crisis, a crisis of meaning, of hope, of what a good life looks like, with the crude tools of command economy. They're using tactical maneuvers to fight a war of the soul.
They keep asking, how much does a baby cost? What is the right price?
And Minjun is answering, the price is my entire life and I'm already over-leveraged.
And Ji-won is answering, the price is my autonomy, and it's not for sale.
That golden key that Minjun was holding, it's a symbol of a contract that no one wants to sign anymore. The old social contract was simple. You work yourself to the bone, you sacrifice everything for your family and the company, your kids get a better life, and the nation gets strong. That contract is broken. It's null and void. But the state hasn't written a new one. They've just offered a cash rebate for the old broken one.
It just takes me right back to that image. Minjun in that sterile hall, holding that folder, the 30-year collateral. It's just such a heavy, powerful image of where things are.
And that 0.85 number the official was so proud of, it's almost certainly a temporary blip. It represents the handful of people for whom the government finally met their price. But the underlying conditions, the despair of the education hellscape, the bitterness of the gender war, the deep existential anxiety, none of that has changed. The market for human life will correct, and the numbers will likely fall again.
Because the administrative Leviathan can build the house. It can pour the concrete and install the fiber optic cables for the smart city. It can even help with the mortgage.
But it cannot force a home to form inside those walls. It cannot manufacture hope. It cannot write a policy that makes a person look toward the future and see not a debt, but a possibility worth bringing a new life into.
What we're watching is a civilization being forced to choose between a kind of financialized, state-managed rebirth, where children are treated as assets and soldiers, and a quiet, automated sunset. For Minjun, and for an entire generation, the answer isn't in those loan documents. It's in whether they can ever look at the future and feel like it's a place they'd want their own child to live.